It means the Ministry's interfering at Hogwarts.
You're not going mad. You're just as sane as I am.
I must not tell lies.
You seem to be laboring under the delusion that I'm going to, what was the phrase? Come quietly.
Hey everyone, welcome to Hogwarts, a podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hogwarts, a podcast. We are talking about Chapter 14, Percy and Padfoot. You guessed it, more alliteration. That laugh should indicate that Elizabeth is back with us.
Hey everyone.
So, the title of the chapter kind of gives it away. It's a lot of Percy and a lot of Sirius. But in between that, we get a meeting of Harry and Cho in the Owlery. We get a Daily Prophet delivery. We get some Quidditch first full team practice moments. We get a letter from Percy specifically that I think both of us had a lot to kind of dive into on that.
And a lot of avoiding homework and then complaining about doing homework.
You're such a teacher.
Just do your stupid homework. Like, oh my God.
Such a teacher. You're right. It's still such a teacher. And then we get Sirius kind of popping in to the common room. So lots to talk about. But I think I wanted to start off with Harry finally understanding how difficult it was for Ron and Hermione to write to him over the summer.
Yeah.
Because he gets up early in the morning, which again, I don't know how you do without an alarm clock, but that's beside the point.
I'm like, after a full week of school where he's been super, super stressed and he's been having late night detentions literally every single night, I am not going to be getting up before noon on a Saturday.
Yeah.
I don't care what letters I got to write. It's not happening.
It just gives me the impression that he's obviously a morning person, because the first light beams that come into his room, he's like, I'm awake. And let's go.
No, I couldn't do it.
But he uses his time to try to formulate a letter to Sirius, and he's realizing that he has to do it in some sort of coded message. And I do like how he takes a step back and tries to read this from a different point of view and be like, can I discern anything if I didn't already know?
You mean Harry's getting smarter?
Oh, I'm not gonna jump the gun here. This particular moment was a smart one on his part, and I think he wrote a very good letter.
I particularly enjoyed the comment that Umbridge is nearly as nice as your mom.
Our large friend.
Where's he at? We're missing him.
Yeah. So
it was really, it really was well done. Like, I don't think people would really know who he's writing to or what he's writing about if they just happened to see it.
Right. So to send this letter, he has to make his way to the Owlery, and on his way to the Owlery, a couple things happen. I think we had slightly different notes. You had the note on Peeves, because Peeves gets a mention.
Yeah, Peeves wants to drop the bust of, I'm going to butcher this name, Paracelsus? Maybe that's it. But he's the father of toxicology on somebody's head. And nearly had the snick is like, yeah, Peeves, he's up to his usual.
I'll go get
boring.
the Bloody Baron.
I'll go do it. Go a different way. So he's like, yeah, all right. Long way to the Owlery.
My note is on Mrs. Norris in this whole thing. Because Harry runs into Mrs. Norris, and she looks at him and then runs off. And Harry's like, I'm not even doing anything. Like, I'm allowed to be here.
She's like, student out of bed this early? How dare you?
Yeah. It's like, this is odd for a Saturday. So we get Harry immediately sending his note via Hedwig, which is important. And then we get Cho entering the Owlery to send a last-minute gift to her mother, whose birthday. So you get an interaction between Cho and Harry, and then it gets interrupted by Filch coming in.
Well, let's not run past the moment between Harry and Cho, because it's so him being like, Cho's here. Now what the heck do I say to her?
He wants to talk about the weather.
He's
And then he's like,
talking about the
I'm
weather.
talking about the weather. Well, she comes out and starts talking about Quidditch,
Yeah.
which is a natural link between the two of them, you would think.
Yes, very much so. And I mean, that helped. But she also mentioned a little bit about Cedric. And he was just like having these little thoughts of like, oh, what if I dramatically show her on accident, but on purpose, the little scar on my hand about must not telling lies, so she knows how brave I was with Umbridge. She wouldn't see through that at all.
Well, she does come out and say that the whole school knows about that interaction, and she thought he was brave for standing up and telling the truth to a teacher, especially one that's seemingly universally disliked.
Within a week. She hasn't even been here for like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. My big Cho Harry moment is actually after, or during, I guess, Filch's interruption, because he comes and thinks Harry's actually sending off for an order of dung bombs. Cho stands up and defends him and is like, well, one, he's already sent the letter. Two, that's whatever. It's not that. But Harry's left with this, like, how did Filch know it was like dung bombs specifically? Because he said someone told him about Harry trying to send dung bombs.
Yeah, someone tipped him off.
And the inference here is that Mrs. Norris told Filch.
Well, I don't know if I would go right to Mrs. Norris.
She's the one that spotted him and then ran off to presumably get Filch.
True. But I was taking it more as like maybe like Filch was told by someone to keep an eye on Harry because he seems to be very troublesome and they've heard rumors of stuff. So then he told Mrs. Norris, like, if you see Potter, let me know. And then she just like ran back and was like, meow. And it's like, that's the Harry's up sign.
I don't know. We can talk a little bit more about it in the spoilers, but I know we've talked a little bit about Mrs. Norris on the podcast, probably going back to Chamber of Secrets when she was petrified.
Well, because their relationship is just so close.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
And, there's some stuff to talk to, that kind of topic about. But we'll continue on. Harry ends up meeting back with Ron and Hermione for breakfast. And Ron notes that he is particularly cheerful. We get a Daily Prophet delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is not bearing the best of news this time.
No, especially, you get Hermione in a rare lack of poise yelling out the name Sirius, which ends up making Harry jump across the table and rip half of the Daily Prophet trying to see what the article was.
Okay, going to that point with them and their whole, like, saying names of things, right? They say Sirius's name a lot, they say the Order a lot, and then they shush each other every time they say Order, and then they're like, Order of the Phoenix, and it's like, oh, you children, this is why they didn't want to tell you things. You are terrible at remembering that people can hear you.
I will give Hermione a little slack on yelling Sirius, because that could be anything. Like, oh, Sirius Black, news about Sirius Black. Okay.
True.
But then Ron almost says Order of the Phoenix, I think twice.
Yeah.
And that's like, well, dude, what are you doing?
But then they go into Snuffles, too, and it's like, okay, you were just talking about Sirius, and now you're saying another S name.
Now you're almost giving away the nickname.
What a complicated code.
I know. They're kids who are admittedly around other kids, only a few of which are probably wise enough to catch on if they're even paying attention and not caught up in their own stuff.
I mean, it is like food.
Well, that's number one. That is, of course, number one. Anyway, so what do we learn? We learn that Sirius is reported to be hiding in London, which would obviously set off some alarm bells across the wizarding world, because he is still perceived as quite a threat.
And alarm bells for Harry and Hermione, because they know Malfoy made that comment on the train, which Ron was still oblivious to. So I don't know if they just forgot to tell him about it or what.
You can safely assume that Lucius is the one with this tip.
Yeah. Easily.
Yeah. But then we also get news of trespass at the Ministry. And we find out that Sturgis Podmore, who, if you remember back to Harry leaving the Dursley house, Sturgis was part of that part of that crew. Sturgis Podmore charged with trespass and attempted robbery. And he was trying to break into a high security door deep within the ministry. And he was arrested by watch wizard Eric Munch.
Look at Eric doing his job.
Eric putting in work. We do know that Sturgis did not defend himself at his hearing, and thus was sentenced to 6 months in Azkaban.
Yeah, Ron had a theory about it, which I thought was interesting. I mean, he said how maybe the ministry set him up to attempt to trespass, and that allowed them the chance to arrest him and question him and whatever. And Harry said that's probably, or he thought at least that it was probably far-fetched. But Hermione was like, you know what? That actually might be a possibility. Which just shows like how uncertain times they're living in right now. Because if conspiracy theories sound reasonable, there's a problem going on.
Well, to be truthful, I don't think it's that far-fetched of a conspiracy theory at this point, given their insider info.
Yeah.
So I think I disagree with Harry in that it's far-fetched. Is it likely? No.
Is it desperate?
But it's not
It would be
far-fetched.
very desperate.
So I'm kind of more with Hermione's like, no, it's possible. It's definitely possible. I do find it interesting that he had trespassed and attempted robbery, and he only got 6 months in Azkaban when he didn't mount a defense of any kind. I'm a little surprised that it's that light of a sentence.
I mean, we've had talks before about how there should be more than one wizard prison, and that does make me wonder how they determine what a sentence should consist of. I mean, attempted, you tried, but you didn't succeed. They also didn't go into much details about where he was attempting to break into. I mean,
Just a high security area.
Yeah, I mean, like, depending on the floor and the ministry and what door it is that you're trying to open, that could get you into a whole different world of anything. So maybe that's why.
Well, continuing to move on, unless you have more Sturgis Podmore.
No, I'm just glad we saw Eric. No, he's still employed.
Still doing his thing.
Checking all the wands.
And so, to Elizabeth's dismay, Ron and Harry decide to shove off homework yet again.
I'm 100% with Hermione on this. Just do it. Like, you're complaining about it. If you just sit down and do it, it won't take you that long.
They decide to put it off to go practice Quidditch before practicing Quidditch. So they decide to take advantage of the nice Saturday weather and go out and get a little pre-practice in.
Which, okay, you are an athletic person.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally your job to deal with athletics.
Yep.
Athletics.
Yep.
So, for someone who is very, very, very non-athletic, and that's putting it kindly, isn't practice before practice a bad idea? Like, wouldn't that risk more chances of injury?
Well, when you're active, yeah. I mean, your risk of injury always goes up. But I think in this case, it's wise to do it because you have Harry is obviously a seasoned Quidditch professional.
Okay.
And Ron is not. Not that he hasn't played Quidditch, because he's obviously played with his brothers before. Mm-hmm. But now he's playing for real and in a competitive setting.
Well, I know part of it is like he wants it to calm his nerves and everything, but I would imagine that having all this extra practice would then make him be tired for practice and then not do as well.
No, I think especially for his position of keeper, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Okay. So I think repetition would only help him. Granted, Harry's not exactly the best chaser in the world.
True.
But here's the thing, and this is what we get into, because obviously it's just Harry and Ron, and that's a comfortable setting. Right. Ron knows that Harry's a safe spot. You know, he's a safe place. He's not going to make fun of him for missing, one or two or whatever. It's constructive criticisms and feedback. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. That would be like me going golfing, playing with a buddy of mine, and we're allowed to make mistakes because it's a safe space. Right. Well, then you get a crowd, and a crowd changes everything. And we see that a little bit. We don't get the big Quidditch crowd like match day, but we get the Slytherin Quidditch team coming to watch the actual official practice that takes place
Plus some extra Slytherins too. Which I just like, okay, I do not understand wanting to give up your Saturday morning, let alone getting up. I suppose that now practice is in the afternoon. So giving up your any aspect of your Saturday to go watch your enemies just practice. Like, you're not even looking for some insight into their tactics.
Oh, I disagree with that.
But it's their first practice. Do they even have tactics yet?
They want to see the new keeper. Number one, they want to see the new keeper. Number two, yes, they want to see Angelina Johnson as the captain and see what her tactics might be. They want to see what the lineup is. They know Harry, but so they yes, they do want to see tactics. Number two, presumably, most of them on the Quidditch team like Quidditch. Most of the students might like Quidditch. They might actually just want to see it. You just said I work in athletics.
True.
When I am off work, what do I still watch in my downtime? Athletics.
Okay, this is very much a me not really caring much about sports at all thing then, because I just cannot comprehend giving up a nice Saturday to just go sit at a stadium and watch practice, not even game, a practice, and just taunt them the entire time. Like, have something better to do with your life.
During the practice, we have an interesting moment where they haven't even gotten into the practice. They're just in warm-ups, passing around a quaffle.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't go great.
Ron hurls the quaffle, goes through Katie Bell's hands, and ends up smoking her in the face. Mm-hmm. And she ends up having a bloody nose. Mm-hmm. To which Fred rushes over and is like, no, I can fix this. I got this. And gives her something from his pocket. Practice continues. And Katie's bleeding only gets significantly worse, not better. To the point where her robes are like drenched in blood.
Yeah.
And Fred's like, oh no.
I'm just imagining like you being the athletic trainer for their practices and being like, you idiots. Why did you do this? Why did you not come to me?
Okay.
Like, Madame Pomfrey is a saint for dealing with her stupidity.
Yeah. So you mentioned I'm an athletic trainer. So my profession is literally dealing with injuries from sports.
Yeah.
So I do deal with this. And on the one hand, I love what Fred was trying to do, because if you gave me a little tablet that can stop a nosebleed instantly, I'm doing that. However, that does not exist. So,
well, especially it seems like they haven't invented it yet. They just have the one side of it.
Well, I think they have started messing around with.
They just haven't perfected it yet.
I think he tried. I think he tried to give the cure for the nosebleed nougat, except he gave the wrong tablet. Of it. And he gave, well, it isn't even the nosebleed nougat. It's a blood blister pod.
Yeah.
So.
Sounds lovely.
It sounds so horrendously bad. And here's my athletic training take on it. If you really want the athletic training take, is that can go horribly, horribly wrong. Like, he could have really done very significant damage to Katie Bell. Mm-hmm. And put her in very significant danger. And I mean,
they were carrying her away towards the hospital wing. She looked so pale and like she couldn't even stand up by herself.
I get what they're doing is groundbreaking work. Mm-hmm. But to Hermione's point, when you're starting to do this on humans, this can backfire. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a real risk that they're running. And I think this was a touch irresponsible on their part. And that's coming from the medical professional in me.
Which is why I feel like we need to give extra props to Madame Pomfrey and any nurse or doctor out there who deals with these types of things, because
Madame Pomfrey deserves...
My God, that woman. She's a saint.
Madame Pomfrey deserves a lot more credit than she ever gets in the series.
Yeah.
But on a lighter note, since obviously practice had to be ended prematurely because now one of her chasers and both of her beaters are gone... Mm-hmm. Here's my thing. They already released the snitch. Does the snitch just float around until the next practice? Or does Harry have to stay behind after practice until he catches the snitch?
That's a good question. I've never thought about that.
And it's one thing if it's Harry Potter, who's pretty good at this. What if it's some guy who's just
When Oliver Wood first told him about Quidditch and he was practicing with him and he's like, we're not going to release the snitch yet because, like, it's so small and fast and it could get away from us. Yeah, I do wonder. Then.
You'd have to think the Seeker has to stay until he catches a snitch.
That or they have a different snitch for every practice.
Random question. Is it just programmed to stay in the general vicinity of the stadium?
I would guess.
Or does it end up in, like, London at some point? Like, just...
I would guess it would stay... I mean, probably what the real answer is it, like, returns itself to the box. But, yeah, I feel like it has to stay within the confines
is there a difference
of the
between
stadium.
training...
How high could it go? You know?
Is there a difference between training snitches and game snitches? Also, honestly...
Is there, like, a cheaper version of the snitch versus, like... the expensive game version?
I also get the impression that this box of Quidditch, like, balls is the box of Quidditch balls that everybody uses.
Probably.
So I think the snitch, the quaffles, and the bludgers are just for total use, game and practice, but I don't know. We're getting into the dynamics of school Quidditch, but anyway. After practice, Ron is in a very poor mood, following his poor performance and the amount of homework that he's realized.
Okay, I feel so bad for Hermione because she asked how practice was, and he was like, absolutely dreadful. And she immediately tries to be consoling, and she lets her anger go, and she's like, well, it was just your first practice, and I was like, who's to say that it was me making it a lousy practice? It's like, that was a natural reaction. You set her up for that.
Also, it doesn't necessarily mean you, Ron.
Yeah.
She could have been saying you, the Gryffindor Quidditch team, because that was their collective first practice.
Yeah, I mean, with Angelina being the first time as captain, and we know this is different from Wood's tactics, and with Ron being the new keeper, and everybody's coming back from summer without presumably practicing all that much. We know Harry certainly hasn't. Like, it was a nice comment, and he got mad.
He's in a foul mood.
Ron in a foul mood is just not fun.
I think all three in the trio have their faults. Mm-hmm. I think the boys are obviously very hot-tempered. Mm-hmm. And
Harry is very stubborn.
Yeah, and Ron can get mean at times. Harry doesn't really get mean. He just vents aggressively. Mm-hmm. Ron can get mean.
Yeah.
And then Hermione sometimes makes some questionable decisions, and she herself holds some grudges from time to time. Mm-hmm. So none of the three are perfect.
Which is good, because we don't want perfect characters. We want well-rounded characters, realistic characters. But yeah, I just would not want to be around Ron when he's in a mood.
Well, this next bit is not going to put him in a better mood.
Dun dun dun.
So he notices that Hermes is by the window, I believe.
Yeah, when they're up late doing homework and Hermione's just knitting. Which we'd have to ask Molly this. Does it count as knitting if you just bewitch the knitting needles to do it for you?
Are you talking about our Molly or Molly Weasley?
Our Molly. Molly, tell us what you think, because I feel like if Hermione were knitting with her own knitting needles and then enchanted other knitting needles to knit as well, then it's like, ooh, partner knitting almost. But if she's just being like sitting there talking to Ginny while these knitting needles are just creating these hats that she's oh so proud of, like, does that count? Like, I feel like anybody could knit. Anybody could knit if they could enchant their needles to do it.
That's what I think. I think it's still knitting, but you lose the sense of self-satisfaction in you having actually personally put in the work to make it.
That makes me just think about, like, art in the wizarding world. How much is it is actually done by the wizard versus how much is it done magically?
So, like, Dumbledore using his wand to paint a portrait is one portrait.
Yeah.
And, like, Justin Finch Fletchley using his wand to create a portrait, even though they're both using the spell.
Very, very different outcome.
Very different outcome.
I
you know what I'm saying?
That.
Is it that kind of tied?
I just wonder how many of them actually, like, pick up a paintbrush or whatever artistic means that they're doing and just physically
Well, we
do
know Albus does love his knitting patterns.
This is true. So we should get his opinion on does this count or not. Moving on.
Moving on to Percy's letter. We're getting to Percy's letter. So there's a lot here. I'm just going to run through a couple of things and then we'll double back and kind of discuss a couple of them. So he was told by Fudge via Umbridge that Ron is now a prefect at Hogwarts, which he congratulates Ron upon.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also, while congratulating him, also kind of knocks him down a peg by saying, I was surprised to hear you were a prefect.
Yeah, that you have stopped flouting authority. I have comments. But continue through the letter.
And then there's warnings to Ron. And there's a series of them. Not just one. There's several. And these warnings include you must unfriend Harry Potter. Albus might not be the headmaster at Hogwarts much longer. People who count, quote, people who count, end quote, have different and more accurate, quote unquote, views of Potter's behavior. So people who count have different and more accurate views of Potter's behavior. We'll get to that one. He's saying that Harry is unbalanced, possibly violent. He calls Umbridge a delightful woman, which if you haven't had
come on,
if you haven't had
What a
some red
stretch.
flags in this letter already, once you get to that point, you're like, wow, okay.
That's like hitting you in the head with a red flag.
Kinda, yeah. He tells Ron to switch loyalty from Albus to the Ministry. And it, quote, pains Percy to criticize his parents, but the petty criminals they rub shoulders with are too much, and they need to stop. So
It's a letter, and I don't know how Ron didn't just like immediately chuck it in the fire, because I think that's what I would have done.
you know, I don't know that I would have chucked it in the fire, at least immediately. Eventually, yes. I would think about, do I send this to Molly and Arthur? Do I send this
Ooh.
Do I send this to Bill or Charlie?
Okay.
Do I even dare show it to Fred and George? Probably
well,
not.
I wouldn't show it to Fred and George.
I wouldn't show it to Fred and George.
He automatically like starts it off with this super dig at them of like, oh, I thought you were going to follow in their path. I'm so glad you're actually following in my footsteps. It's like, okay, one, sir, you are not the only prefect in the family. So, like...
He's not even the second one. Charlie and
I
Bill were
know.
both prefects.
So, like, get off your high horse there, sir. And doing the whole, like, you've stopped flouting authority, which made me angry because it's like, okay, the times that Ron has so-called flouted authority have all been times that were rewarded or celebrated or, like, literally, he's helped save your sister from certain death by flouting the rules and going into the girls' bathroom and then going into the Chamber of Secrets. Like, I mean, what flouting did he do in his first year other than just going after the stone and then, like, sneaking out that one time to be the second for Harry in the duel with Malfoy? I mean, he didn't even have the detention for, like, getting the dragon up in the tower. Third year, I don't know what flouting he does other than being just out of bounds in the Shrieking Shack, but I don't know if Percy even is aware about that. So it's like, flouting rules, really? Ron doesn't really do it as much as you think.
There's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. And the vibe I get from reading Percy's letter as a whole is how much he's so disconnected with reality. Some of it's not his fault because he's not there.
Yeah.
And let's be real, he doesn't spend a whole lot of time in and around Harry or Ron or his family anymore.
Or Dumbledore.
So, like, he's out of the loop, and part of that is his fault because he himself has taken himself out of the loop. Being so disconnected from everything and having that sense of reality kind of warp, the logical person in me would be like, well, how do you know? What do you really know about Harry Potter? Like, every time he's been at the house, you've really only had breakfast with him. You've been shut up in your room most of the time.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you actually know of Harry Potter?
Aww.
What do you really know of the events going on? Or are you just getting a one-sided view of everything. And I get Percy is very goal-oriented and goal-driven, and he only sees one path as being the correct path, which is all ministry-related. So he's just going to spout whatever the ministry says because that's where he wants to be. That's where he wants to be, is the be-all and end-all.
I like that he sees Ron's promotion to being prefect, which Ron had zero control over, as proof that Ron is just as ambitious as him in terms of, like, befriending the right people and putting his loyalty in a place where in several years it will benefit you to, you know, like, be with Professor Umbridge and be on her side. Like, his ambition is overleaping himself here.
I mean, the line, people who count have different, and here's the part that gets me about it, and more accurate views of Potter's behavior. How do you know that? You don't know that.
See, what gets me is the line, he said something about many of the people I've spoken to remain convinced of his guilt. Like, the trial really wasn't much about his guilt. It was, you know, did he do this magic or not? He flat out admitted, like, yes, I did this magic, but the reason why I did this magic was because the Dementors. So it was the question of more, was this magic in self-defense, or was this magic for the sake of, like, flouting it in front of the Muggles and, like, revealing our existence to the world?
Which is stupid, because the Muggle he flouted it in front of was his cousin that he lived in the same house with.
He was there when Hagrid banged down the door.
But Percy dismisses it as a technicality. He got off on a technicality.
Yeah, he said a lot of people are still convinced he's guilty.
Here's my thing. I mean, I have a lot. I have a lot on this. But the bit about Umbridge being a delightful woman, when the shroud of whatever rose-colored glasses you're looking through, whatever you're looking through, gets taken away, and you see what it really is, do you accept that reality or not? Or do you just always believe in the lie no matter what's in front of your face? Because what do you think Percy would think if Harry goes up to him and was like, I must not tell lies is etched in the back of my hand now because I'm being tortured in every detention?
I feel like he'd probably be like, well, you were telling lies, so therefore that was a deserved punishment.
But I'm not disagreeing with that thought, because he might. That's a valid thing that he might say. But then you're getting into the core of it being, but isn't that still torture?
I think people find it easier to excuse things that are bad, like some torture or some level of bigotry or, like, I don't know, racism or whatever the case may be, if it's just a little bit, because they're like, well, you know, that wasn't great, but the means justify the ends. So if, you know, Harry, if you're telling lies and these lies are going to bring down Fudge and then therefore, like, hurt me in my position in the ministry, well, then, yeah, carve your words into the back of your hand a few more times. Like, it's not great, but it's justified.
So the bit about it pains me to criticize our parents, that hits me in a couple of different ways. So he's always looked up to Bill and Charlie for being exemplary siblings and children ahead of him who have set a high bar that he has strived towards. Bill especially, I think.
Oh, because he's head boy.
That, and, you know, Bill's successful. He's got a good job.
I imagine Percy sees himself as being even higher, though, because he went the ministry route.
Sure. But here's my thing, is why this confirms to me that he's reached out to Bill and Charlie.
In what way?
Sent a letter.
No, I mean, like, why does it confirm it for you?
Because if he's sending a letter to Ron over a prefect, that's great. And he's sending, like, oh, you got to get away from Harry Potter, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. I think for sure he's written Bill and Charlie and been like, do you believe Dad's connection to Dumbledore? Do you believe this story that they're making up about whatever?
So I don't know if I agree with that, because I feel like I don't know if Bill or Charlie have done anything to indicate any change in loyalty, but I feel like Percy is seeing this prefect promotion as proof that like Ron is becoming more serious in his ways, and he's stopped being, led by that dangerous boy.
Well, I don't know that Charlie was there, which I can pretty much assume Charlie was not present for the Percy Arthur argument. Bill may have been. So maybe he assumes Bill is not going to be on his side, on Percy's side. Charlie doesn't necessarily know until he like communicates with him and is like, hey, do you believe all of this? I still think Bill and Charlie are people that he'd want to reach out to, is to try to get them on the side, unless he's been in a room with Bill already and Bill's been like, no. Like, I don't know what you're doing. But then that's interesting, because if he respects Bill, what does that do to Percy? Like, if he's like, I know Bill's a smart, reasoned guy.
Well, I think that just puts him further down the rabbit hole of being like, this shows how dangerous Dumbledore and his ideas are. If he can persuade someone as smart as him, then I guess I'm the smart one because I got away from that. Going back to something you said earlier, though, do you think that Ron should have told his parents about Percy's letter? Because I feel like that is a dangerous path to take. And I would be completely torn about whether or not I should do it.
It's a tough one, because obviously Percy's name is so taboo now in the family. That being said, I think you might not have to say word for word or send the exact letter to them, but I think it is worthwhile having that open line of communication. Be like, hey, Percy reached out to me, and he's saying I should unfriend Harry, and just things like that. You don't necessarily have to get into the, it pains me to criticize our parents. I would also relay the fact that some of these rumors about like, hey, he's saying Dumbledore's not going to be long for Hogwarts.
Yeah.
So,
like, dun, dun, dun.
Like, there are some things here that he should probably relay to them and be like, hey, just a heads up.
I feel like it might be nice for Molly to hear like, okay, Percy is still obviously thinking about the family, not in the ways that we want him to, but he's still doing okay. But I feel like it would ignite so much more anger and passion in Arthur, and that would be dangerous. And I don't know, it's such a hard thing when it's like tattling to your parents about your siblings, because there's that sibling code of like, you're not supposed to tattle to on
This
each
doesn't
other.
count as tattling.
Right, because this is like, I mean, this is so
This
much
is
more,
real.
This is so much more adult than that.
This is not Fred and George testing nosebleed nougat.
right.
Which, by the way, can also be still serious, for the record. But it's more than that. I mean, this is a
It has like
real issue.
real implications, and that's where it gets hard, because the first time you're ever presented with a situation like that, you're like, I don't know what to do. What's the best way to handle it? Because there's so much emotional, like, so much emotions tied to it.
You know what they need? They need some advice from an older, wiser individual who's been through it. And guess what? Sirius pops in.
What a good segue.
Thank you so much. Sirius pops in the common room after everybody has gone to bed except for these three, and drops some knowledge. And one of the best quotes, I think, in the Harry Potter series, and that I think most people need to know, even in real life, is the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters.
Yeah. There's a lot of gray areas.
There's a lot of gray areas, and we've jokingly talked about it in the idea of Azkaban and what else. Like, there should be an alternative to Azkaban. But very seriously, yeah, not everybody's a Death Eater. Not everybody's a great angel of a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some gray areas. Not everybody's good all the time. Look at our trio. Not everybody does the right thing all the time. Sometimes they do the wrong thing. And, that's life. That's just how life is. But I love that quote from Sirius near the top of it. We learn a little bit more about Umbridge. We learn that she has been involved in anti-werewolf legislation, which does not thrill Lupin.
Not a big fan of
Not a big
not
fan.
On Team Umbridge.
It's made him essentially unable to find a job.
Yeah, which knowing Lupin, of course, that's going to make you even hate Umbridge even further. The man deserves some work.
She also has had her hand in trying to have mer people round up and tagged.
Which, how do you think you'd even go about doing that? They were a whole community that'd be like, I could see that as going and trying to invade another country and being like, all right, I'm gonna tag you up. Like they had a whole world down there.
I'm sure you could. I'm sure it wouldn't be easy. It would not be easy, and it's obviously wouldn't be well received. So obviously Sirius has some insights as to what they're hearing about Fudge, and the idea that Fudge is fearing that Albus is training an army.
Yeah, he's paranoid.
So that's why
Sad and paranoid man.
Which is why they don't want to teach actual practical magic in Defense Against the Dark Arts.
Trained in combat.
Which, in theory, that's what it's always been.
I know, but I love how Ron was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, including anything Luna Lovegood has ever said.
Which he's only really known her for like a month.
That's what makes it even better.
Not even a month. It's been like 2 weeks.
She made that big of an impression on him.
I think this is me pulling myself out of the world of Harry Potter for just a second. I think that is only there for J.K. Rowling to be like,
hey, remember Luna Lovegood?
Yeah, of like, oh, I haven't mentioned her in a minute. Here's this name. You should remember this name.
Yeah, probably. They also asked about Hagrid. You said Hagrid's supposed to be back by now, but he hasn't. But don't worry, even though, of course, that's immediately what the trio does.
Yeah, he doesn't really lay that out the best way. But he's like, hey, Hagrid's a tough guy. No one's worried about Hagrid.
Right.
He can take care of himself. And we know that he was with Madame Maxine as well.
Right, which is good to know that she went with wherever they went. I mean, 2 half giants. They're formidable.
They would be formidable. We do get this interaction between Harry and Sirius where Sirius wants to come see him at Hogsmeade.
Mm-hmm.
And Harry immediately shuts that down and was like, absolutely not. They almost caught you at King's Cross. Did you see that article in the Prophet? And, Sirius brushes it off. He's like, oh, they always say I'm somewhere. Right. It's fine.
Right.
And Harry's like, no, Malfoy was really like laying it on that he thinks it's more than just a guess. And Sirius ends up being a little disappointed that Harry isn't as risky as James. He literally says just the risk involved alone would have made James do this.
Which, okay. I feel like as a comment, this is super immature to make. Because you're guilt-tripping Harry about doing something that is dumb. Harry's right. Like, you should not be doing this risk. But at the same time, like, I get his mindset. He said he's alone in the house. No one in the Order is there. They've just been, half the Order is back at Hogwarts right now. The Weasleys have probably gone home because the kids have gone to school, so they feel safe again. But I'm like, why would Dumbledore not station someone there with Sirius, other than Creature, who could do, like, mental health checks, but also make sure that he doesn't try to do something stupid like this and get himself caught, because that would be really bad too.
I think it's twofold. I think it's the other members of the Order have a lot on their plates and they're spread thin. Most of them have actual jobs that they need to attend. Maybe you wonder why Remus isn't staying there.
It would seem like a logical place for
it
him
would
to
seem
be.
like it. I know he's got his own jobs that he needs to get done. That's fine. But the other side of this is, I think Dumbledore is in full war mode. I think he's locked into playing the game,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the only thing he's seeing. Like, he's got blinders on, is like, how do I win this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that, he loses humanity. He loses touch of what Harry needs as a human being, and he loses touch of what Sirius might need as a human being.
So the emotional learning kind of like goes out the window.
They're just pieces to him, ultimately, when they need to be people. And you need to actually treat them as people. And
it's just
what they
unfortunate
need.
because it's like, you know, he's escaped Azkaban. He's gotten his freedom only to go right back into this isolation in a place that is depressing to him. And while it's not guarded by Dementors, he's got the portrait of his mother screaming at him. He's got a creature making nasty comments to him. And it's like...
It might even be
from
worse.
From one prison to another.
It might actually be worse because in Azkaban, you have no illusion of freedom.
And you had a purpose for trying to get out. Here, you know you can't
in the house
leave.
There's this illusion of freedom. You're free, but you're not.
Yeah.
And that's I think almost worse, is that you can see the outside.
Yeah.
You know it's right there.
Yeah,
and if you want to, you can, but you can't.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it worse, is that temptation's right there in front of his face.
And knowing the history of living there and what life was like back then, and you're stuck there again. Not fun.
Not fun. But you know what will be fun? Our spoiler section.
So should they come back to
You
listen?
definitely should. Before we get to the spoiler section, we would be remiss if we didn't say that we are recording this on September 1st, which is...
It's back to Hogwarts Day!
Back to Hogwarts Day, so it's a big day in the Harry Potter fandom.
Yeah,
so...
by this point that we're recording, the first years have definitely been sorted and gone into their common rooms and found their ways to the castle, which means school's going to be starting. Everyone should be excited.
We have both started school a long time
Yeah,
ago,
school's been going for like 2.5 weeks now. Let's be real.
That's been a thing. So, anyway, we will be right back with a spoiler section of Chapter 14. All right, so we are back with the spoiler section of Percy and Padfoot, Chapter 14. So, a couple of things I wanted to just mention here, and I want to double back on something that I mentioned in the non-spoiler, just very briefly, because I think we've talked about it before, but with Mrs. Norris, and I know towards the end of the series, when everybody's trying to figure out what secrets Book 7, Deathly Hallows, might hold, a lot of people were going back to Mrs. Norris, and I think this interaction that we had in this chapter, where she looks at Harry, runs off to Filch, and then Filch is like, yeah, somebody told me you were doing this at the Owlery. And Harry's like, who told you that? And I think people go back to this chapter in their whole...
combing through for secret mysteries.
Mrs. Norris is an animagus. Mrs. Norris is this or that or whatever. And is going to play a big factor in Deathly Hallows.
What irony that would be if Filch was the squib and Mrs. Norris was the like super, super magical one.
I mean, a lot of people had those theories, and it just didn't pan out in Book 7, and Mrs. Norris just kind of was like a meh.
No, I really think Umbridge just told Filch, like, hey, that Harry Potter, keep an eye on him, because he's super, super shifty, and I heard he's going to order dung bombs, and then he was like, oh, Mrs. Norris, Harry Potter is going to do something bad.
But think about
Let's find him.
But think about it, though. There has to be some magical connection between the two. Because there's an understanding there that is not a normal understanding between owner and pet.
Okay, I could see Mrs. Norris as having different types of meows of like
Harry Potter's in the Owlery doing something.
Well, I don't think she got that specific. I think it's just like she made a meow that was like, a student is doing something bad, and he was like, okay. So then he just chases after her, and she brings him up to Harry, and he's like, haha, I deserve a treat. Cats have specific meows, and the owners can learn them. I'm sure it's the same for dogs, even though I've never had a dog.
Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to discuss was when Harry and Cho are in the owlry.
Whether or not Kissing.
No, they're conversing politely
Uh-huh.
Upon the morning's weather. No, they're
The most romantic of topics.
Harry does have this thought go through his head. It's like, I wonder how it would have been different if I had asked Cho before Cedric.
Right. Because he said she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm already going with somebody else.
Right. How would it have been different?
Oh, that's hard.
Think about it, because everything changes. Everything changes.
If he were with Cho...
She's emotionally connected to Harry, not Cedric. So the events of their little Valentine's date doesn't go as poorly.
Ugh, I hate that Valentine's
I
Day.
get it, but the whole thing would have been different.
I would even back up. If he were with Cho, would Cedric have given him the hint about the egg?
Yes, because Harry gave him the hint about the dragon.
But what if he was like, I wanted to be with Cho? And he also had those thoughts that like Harry had of, screw
no,
you.
I think
you struggle through it.
This is gonna get me so much hate because people already think I'm a Cedric apologizer, but no, because I think Cedric's level of fair play
Of maturity.
And maturity, because he's just older, is beyond that.
Okay,
and he's just like, no, Harry did me a solid. I'm gonna pay him back. The Cho and Harry relationship might not go as poorly or as far south as it does.
It's not as awkward. You don't have Cedric hanging over it.
Right. You don't have a lot of it hanging over it.
Mm.
So at the very least, if they don't end up together, they can still date for longer than maybe they go, and it changes a lot of things. I know people are yelling at me right now on the podcast listening to this, being like, no, Harry and Ginny forever. And I get that. I'm just posing an alternate reality where...
I could imagine that based on like Cho's reactions to the DA when her friend gets caught and how she's like, oh, well, she just took a risk or whatever. I could see her as not being as supportive of Harry wanting to go off to like save Sirius or do something that is reckless, whereas Ginny, I think, because she knows Harry so well and understands him so well, that she supports that. I could see Cho as being more scared and logical of, well, that's a stupid thing to do, you could get hurt. And
do we know that?
She's a Ravenclaw.
Luna's a Ravenclaw.
Yeah. But I feel like Cho, like, if she's dating someone, she's wanting them to be safe. And Harry's not safe. That was some of the choices he made.
To be fair, Ginny also wants him to be safe.
Yeah, but she also wants to be there right there with him doing the unsafe things.
I think she shows great levels of concern in Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows, where she's like, I don't know if you should be doing some of this. Like, some of this is too much.
Yeah, but that was also, like, directly going after Voldemort.
Well, also, her feelings become wrapped into it, too.
True.
Now you're not just his friend.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're his girlfriend, and you're like, oh, wait, I don't want him to be put in, like, harm's way all the time. Yeah.
Every single year.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not just Cho.
I don't know. I mean...
It's an interesting question to pose because Cho ignites a certain type of conversation in the Harry Potter family.
Part of it is because Cho is so emotional, and Ginny... I mean, Harry mentions later in, what was it, Book 7, how he appreciates the fact that Ginny is not, like, a very teary-eyed, cries a lot type of girl, which I think is meh.
There are reasons for Cho's emotional instability throughout this book.
Right. Those who have an emotional range larger than a teaspoon can understand why she reacts the way she does.
I don't know. It's just a thought of, like, Harry poses the question himself. What would have happened if?
Yeah.
And now that we're in the spoiler section and we know what ultimately happens, it's just an interesting question to kind of extrapolate out to the rest of the
No, I
series.
agree. There definitely would be less awkwardness with them talking to each other, I would think. Although I would like to see them go over, like, extend their conversation past Quidditch and the weather, because...
Well, I think Cho would also like their conversations to go beyond that. I don't think Harry's capable at the moment of coming, and that's probably honestly why she liked Cedric.
Had more to talk about?
Probably, yeah.
Well, I suppose, okay, even if, like, they had dated, even if Cedric hadn't died, there would still be the factor of Voldemort's back, and I think that would distract him too much to really focus on her needs, whether they be emotional or whatever.
Well, to your point, Cho is not fully in that fight like Ginny is. Ginny's in that fight.
Yeah.
Not to say Cho wouldn't or couldn't. That's projecting on Cho. It's just,
I could see her as helping out, but wanting someone else to do the more dangerous stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, part of this, I think we're focusing on, like, what Harry would be in that situation. Well, what would Cho be in that situation?
True.
Cho's probably completely different. As much as that event changed Harry, that event changed Cho, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're just getting one side of one thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, for Cho, she was super, super, super popular. Probably very well adjusted. Probably super social. I would imagine her social life has completely gone down the drain.
She obviously believes Harry's story and Harry's retelling of the events. I think that says a lot about her. I don't know if she's doing that just because it's Harry Potter and she likes Harry Potter, or she genuinely believes it.
Well, that or she just needed the closure to know what happened with Cedric.
I don't know. It's there's more there to dive into, and believe me, we'll have more Harry Cho talk as this book continues.
As long as I'm not there for their date. I was just wanting to talk a little bit about Ron's Quidditch playing. Like, okay, again, this is sports stuff, so not my wheelhouse, but I know you and Jen in particular have talked before about, like, making changes to a team, whether it be the management or the players or whatever. Like, I feel like Ron in any normal year probably would not last on the team as long as he did. And maybe it's just Angelina being too new to the position of captain or what. And I know they probably blame it more on the fact that, like, half the team gets kicked off the team by Umbridge. But I feel like his playing, it should have improved way sooner than it did for him to be on the team as long as he was.
Well, she said right out the gate that there were better flyers. She just banked on the fact that his family heritage.
Which, like, wouldn't you think, like, once that's been proven wrong, you'd be like, okay, you could be an alternative, but we're going to go after somebody else who could win us some games.
Time out. So this is me coming to Ron's defense here.
Okay.
No one ever says he's bad. It's not that he's bad.
He's inconsistent.
He's inconsistent, and he particularly gets worse when the pressure gets higher. Mm-hmm. It's not that he's necessarily a bad Quidditch player, a bad keeper, a bad flyer. It's just some people do better in pressure situations than others. And
I'm surprised they didn't try to do, like, as part of their training, dealing with crowds.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of going back to what I was talking about in the non-spoiler of, like, if I'm out there with a buddy playing golf, that's one thing. If I have other people watching me play golf, I suddenly get nervous because I'm like, well, I don't want to hit a bad shot in front of these people that I don't know. I want to look good.
So how would you try to work through that?
You try to block it out, and you try to take a deep breath and hit the same shot you do if you're in front of 1,000 people or if you're by yourself on a driving range. You try. Mm-hmm. You try to block that out, but there's reasons why some people are pro golfers playing in front of 300 people on a tee box, or me playing at the local public course that shoots 100. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why some people are some people and other people aren't. Some can handle that pressure, some can't. That doesn't mean he's bad at it, though. It just means, yes, there might be better options.
You know what I wonder?
And are there better options? Because I don't know that there are.
Well, I'm just wondering, okay, here's a what if for you. That whole spell that Harry discovers in the Half-Blood Prince's book, there's
a few.
The
Muffliata?
That one. Do you think he could cast that on the stadium and just block out the Weasleys Are King song?
I mean, you could block out maybe the jeering and the taunting. Mm. You can't block out the fact that you're playing in front of presumably hundreds of people.
I feel like it's a more audible thing than it is visual for him. He's high up enough in the air. If he could just not hear the song, not hear their jeers, focus on the ball.
He got
and
nervous
the players.
just playing in the general practice with Gryffindor before the Slytherins even showed up.
Yeah, but because they were there from the start. They were jeering him from the start.
He was nervous about the whole practice from the beginning. That's why they did the pre-practice session.
Because it's their first practice. But, I don't know. I feel like if there were never any Slytherins there jeering at him, and then there was never any Weasley is Our King song.
Fred and George just made him nervous. His brothers made him nervous.
Yeah. But he's played with his brothers before.
Yeah, but not for real. I know there's a real difference in messing around in your backyard, and now you're going to a competitive event that actually counts for something. It really does make a difference. It really does.
I'm just going to take your word for it because, again, Believe me, not athletic.
I've spent my entire life around athletics. There are levels to this.
But other than that, no, not too many spoilers of this chapter.
Cool. With that,
we'll just have more delightful Dolores in the future.
We're just getting into the middle third of this book.
I know, we're so far in, and yet it's
such a long way.
It's the first week of school.
Such a long way to go. So, thank you everybody for listening to the episode. Comment, retweet on Twitter, share the podcast, get us out there. It really helps our podcast grow, and participate in those polls that we put on Spotify or that Elizabeth posts on Twitter. They're really cool to see what you guys kind of think of everything. Mm-hmm. And then obviously there's a support the podcast link wherever you're hearing this podcast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever. And it's just an opportunity to leave a donation for us and support this podcast financially. It really does help because it's a lot of work doing these, a lot of time. If you don't want to donate financially, please just share the podcast. That does a lot for us. So thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with chapter 15.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Hogwarts, a podcast. If you like what you've heard, please click the subscribe button on your preferred podcasting app and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Hogwarts a Pod.